So we are back. We are midway through attempting to get round as many of Dorsets Hillforts in a single day. You know, it would go a long way if you'd catch the previous episode, as we laid a lot of the groundwork there, and we can't fully catch everyone up on everything, but the modern borders of Dorset follow quite closely to the ancient territory of a people called the Durotriges, who lived here before the arrival of the Romans, and it's here you can find some of the most remarkable hill forts anywhere in Britain. So our current scorecard includes all of these. Just to head off the most obvious comments, while getting between as many hill forts from sunrise to sunset meant we had to be watching the clock and covering a not inconsiderable distance by road, that means that as well as all the footage we caught on the day, we're frequently cutting in footage from previous visits on days where the conditions for filming may have been better, or we just had more time on our hands to get better coverage. Speaking of which, can't lie, I had really wanted to do this on a sunny day, and when the sun shines, the hill forts of Dorset become something incredible. I still remember the first ever time we visited Hambledon Hill. It was in the middle of summer and it was a glorious day. The views over the English countryside were exquisite. It still makes me warm just thinking about it, but triangulating an entirely blue sky sunny day like that, not the most common in England, with both Sean and my work calendars, we ended up just having to settle for a mostly sunny day. And while, as you probably saw last time, we'd had a lovely time in the morning, if a little chilly and starting to get a little windy, but as lunchtime came and went, it was clouding over and sadly the colour would wash out of much of the remainder of our day. So yes, I'm cutting in extra footage. It's a bit of a continuity mess when you're cutting between grey to blue and back again. It's not ideal. Anyway, we are away further north. In fact, just briefly, we're going to dip outside of Dorset for the next couple. Cadbury Castle is a quite unique place. It feels very different to the sites we've done so far. It has been associated with King Arthur, and while giving that much credence would not be the greatest use of our time, it is true that the site saw use, or should that be reuse, after the Roman period. Amongst other things, evidence of a great hall was discovered in excavations. Now, this would dovetail into a much wider discussion, one which we're not going to have time to open up here. It's the degree to which the Romans had changed Britain. Fundamentally, when the legions withdraw at the beginning of the 400s, was the population left behind just some Iron Age Britons who'd been kind of just putting up with the Roman taxation and a few new towns in the landscape? Or was this a completely different people who'd been transformed by Roman culture, Christianized, and, to use the extremely loaded term, civilized to resemble the rest of the Roman world more closely? Just a book recommendation, by the way. UnRoman Britain digs into this question exactly of how much difference the Romans really made, or if the Iron Age occupants were pretty much just living in the same manner they had before the Romans arrived. Anyway, it's a massive topic, but let's be clear, a huge open question, not least because the period following Roman rule happens to be very thin on the ground for written sources. Hence, we are really scrabbling around for details in the archaeology wherever we can get them. Now, circling back to Cadbury, yes, it's perhaps not surprising that a hill fort location that made for a good fortress in the Iron Age would make for an equally good stronghold 400 years later, in a time that we can say with fair confidence was something of a power vacuum. This pretty much counts as a trig point, right? It's a little fancy, but sure. With skies growing substantially more grey, we got back on our way, and this next one was a new one, even for me. Sean was momentarily taking a breather in the car since we'd been driving and hill-forting almost non-stop since 6:30 a.m. Truthfully, Ham Hill is a bit of an odd duck as far as hill forts go, not its own fault. As you approach, the first thing you see is the War Memorial, and then... Ham Hill has been quarried quite extensively, and continues to be so, it would seem. It's still a popular walking spot, and something to add interest, there's a stone circle plonked in the middle. For first-timers, don't get too excited. Stone circles and hill forts are separated historically by at least 2,000 years, so putting one atop a hill fort is a bit of an oil and water mix. And call me fussy, there's just something of an uncanny valley thing for me here, where looking at a stone circle isn't Neolithic, there's just something kind of off with it. Also, this site is pretty huge. I was focusing on this part directly above the village of Stoke-some-Hampden, but Ham Hill extends way back to the south and east over a much larger area than just this bit. In fact, it's highly irregular in form. There's trees and more quarrying to confuse the picture, but there's also ramparts all the way to nearly a mile south of this bit. So, using the cenotaph as a stand-in for our trig point, it was back on the road. After a brief foray into what is nowadays the county of Somerset, we're now crossing back into the western extent of Dorset. Over in that direction, you can see another hill fort at Lewiston Hill. Correction. You can see the trees that entirely cover Lewiston Hill, functionally screening it from view. Pilsden Pen is unusually precise in shape. This sort of elongated teardrop with a high level of symmetry is not how things were usually done. There's a topic for another day, but while hard to see, the shape of Hembury Hill Fort a few miles away is almost the same in form, but that conversation will have to wait. We don't have time to also be spilling into Devon today. The next couple kind of highlight this problem. With places we've been so far, a lot of them are pretty large, pretty impressive ramparts, and with some aerial footage and a bit of explanation, you can sort of see, okay, yeah, I see how you could get enthused about these. However, when it comes time to convince family members or a cadre of friends to accompany you hill-forting, it doesn't have the instant wow fact of something like a cathedral, castle, or even just a Roman ruin. So there's this split between hill forts, to which you can take the uninitiated and they see what you're excited about, versus sites where they might amend their opinion of you because you have ostensibly become very excited about a barely visible bump in the ground. A bump that might not appear that different to the small bump delineating the edge of the car park, if there was one. I've always found that enthusiasm is contagious. When it comes to taking your friends to Lambert's Hill, for example, they might not take an oath on that day to become scholars of the Iron Age, but it's a view, it's an ancient curiosity, it's a good day. And this, believe it or not, is still pretty luxurious in hill fort terms. Just being real, many hill forts across the UK are borderline imperceptible, particularly if there's tree cover. Unless you are specifically looking out for a ditch and have a very specific spot to look for it, chances are you might not have any idea you'd even entered a hill fort. And, I might get booed for this, but I've just got to be honest, this is a good reason not to be too completionist when it comes to visiting hill forts. The ones that are only barely visible in one small section, or some, in modern times, completely invisible without LiDAR or putting a spade in the ground. And it's not to say that these are not important archaeologically. Quite the opposite. But I can't lie, my enjoyment and enthusiasm for these sites derives mainly from being able to photograph them. And so, if there's nothing at all to see or point a camera at, for me, it's just a lot less likely we're going to be making the trip. Anyway, these next two, they're nice for a short walk, sure. And from the ground, they're not especially easy to make out, but if you get above them, you can see a modest amount. So firstly, Lambert's Castle. This site has had a number of uses over the century. There were fairs held up here, even horse racing in the 1700s, and also used during the Napoleonic Wars. But the main visible part of the enclosure is at the far end of this open area. While, sure, they're not the highest banks or the deepest ditches we've seen today, you can see from above, okay, there's definitely something there. And then right on time, Trig Point. And a very short distance down the road, Coney's Castle. Now this takes the camouflage a little further. The separate enclosure at the far end is much easier to perceive, but the form of the rest of the ditches, less so. It's divided into a lower and upper enclosure here and here, and while no formal archaeology has been done there, it was reported that a cache of sling stones was discovered in the area. So yes, Coney's Castle. If it wasn't so nearby and easy to add to our list for this day, it wouldn't have been a huge priority to go and hit. But moving along, of all the impressive Dorset Hillforts, I feel like this next one is kind of slept on. It's not unknown by any means, but compared to the popularity of, say, Badbury or, well, if you know even the tiniest thing about Dorset Hillforts, you already know where this episode is heading. But a mixture of its out-of-the-way location and, it just sort of slips through the cracks somewhat. But it's absolutely massive with multi-valley ditches that can swallow a bus. Egerton is the next afternoon walk you need to take if you haven't already been. Despite being 4 miles inland from the coast, it's high and large enough to be usable as a navigation aid from the sea. In fact, reputedly, a smuggler planted some trees there exactly for this reason, which, if you see this octagonal feature there, apparently that's where that was. The fort itself, there are traces of Bronze Age activity in the area with some barrows and also a linear earthwork that runs through the middle. While the north has been ploughed quite heavily, you can see a number of features in the southern half. The survey indicated numerous roundhouses, but there was an interesting detail that came out. The roundhouses did not appear to have their own enclosures, which is what you'd normally see at other sites, and this might mean that the interior functioned as one big integrated community. You might assume that this was the default for people in a smaller space like a hill fort, but no, turns out, in the Dorset context at least, this is more of the exception.
I swear these trick point shots are getting worse.
So we got back on the road. It was now getting to late afternoon and we were closing in on the finish line, but still had to make it across a fair slice of Dorset first. A quick one to mention in passing. You know, the majority of Dorset's hill forts enjoy excellent public access, many with parking and or signage. So Chilcombe Hill is something of an outlier, being on private land and without obvious access. You know, it's still in use as farmland, and plough damage has left it somewhat slight compared to others in Dorset. The dividing line between the north and southern sections is a modern field boundary. There were a number of roundhouses detected in the survey, along with a few Iron Age finds suggesting a comparatively significant settlement in the early Iron Age, but there's not been an archaeological investigation of the site, so a lot of unanswered questions. Since we can't access that, at least not easily, we are moving on, trying not to run over this peacock, and getting further south still. As you're seeing, the Dorset Hillforts are not short of a gorgeous panorama over the countryside, such that even if you're not even the tiniest bit interested in one scrap of history, they still make great locations for a walk or day out, just for the views alone. But the next offers a frankly absurd view over the Dorset coast to the west of Weymouth. Located a short way above the village of Abbotsbury, which is very lovely itself, Abbotsbury Castle, or Camp, whichever, has perhaps one of the best wide views of Portland anywhere, with the scoop of Chesil Beach just below it. I mean, gorgeous stuff. Though on this particular day, the clouds were sapping a lot of the colour, hence why I'm comping in shots from days with better sunshine. As for the fort itself, it's quite intensively defended in the southeastern corner with several layers of ramparts leading to an entrance. Ooh, trig point. While there are other barrows in the area, this is by far the most distinctive, believed to be early Bronze Age, and as a place to spend eternity, hard to complain about the location. The survey has revealed several possible roundhouses, however, there doesn't appear to have been intense occupation. Likely only about 5 dwellings by the time of its abandonment. Because of its commanding position over the coastline for miles in either direction, it seems the most obvious location for a signal station. There was a suggestion of a Roman signal station on the western edge, but excavations were unable to confirm this. Right, we're on the home loop now, doubling back just a little way north of Weymouth. In fact, it offers some of the best views of Weymouth anywhere, with Portland just beyond it. This is Chalbury, which I have something of a soft spot for. It's covered in this quite coarse, long grass, and we're not near anything else really. There's not much proper parking to speak of, and you wouldn't be here unless you'd specifically made the journey. It's just on the edge of the ridgeline that travels parallel to the Dorset coast, and there was significant Bronze Age activity in this area, including numerous barrows that can be seen along the route. And there's just a couple of barrows you can almost just see at the top. If you peer past the turf, you can also make out some small indents in the hill. There was archaeology done here in 1939 by Margaret Whitley, who put a dating of the ramparts to between 400 to 50 BC, and she also partly investigated the interior, excavating 4 of these depressions and finding domestic items such as pottery and a spindle hall. It's proved harder to determine if the other circular features are hut platforms or possibly pits, and some might even be later quarrying of the site. There is a significant modern quarry eating away at the western edge of the hill.
So it doesn't appear there's a trig point, so I reckon we just lay hands on this rock. Here we go. Rock! Oh, well, I picked scissors, so, you know.
Well, we're going to have to hurry if we're going to make it before sundown. With the light going, we thankfully didn't have far to travel. Hopping back on the main road from Weymouth to Dorchester, we end up in the northwest of the town, and this is Poundbury. There was Bronze Age activity on the site, and at least one of these barrows is still quite clearly visible. Approaching the site from the road, it doesn't actually seem like much of a rise compared to the land around it, although the ramparts are impressive in height, and the hill does drop off quite sharply to the north. The site also saw later Roman use, as well as the possibility of a Romano-British temple within the enclosure, a feature that might pass you by when you're standing there. It certainly did on my first 2 visits. What might look at first like an odd extension of the ramparts that snakes away from the fort is in fact the remains of a Roman aqueduct. Now that might be a bit of a chin scratcher, as most of us would sort of picture these more monumental aqueducts from around Europe, but this would have been a ditch lined with material sealing it, and just recently there's been more work done with this that show that the aqueduct actually stretches for even longer than previously thought. But we're a little outside our pre-Roman Iron Age wheelhouse here, so thankfully, since we were about to run out of daylight, and for all the Hillfort heads, you already know where this is heading anyway, working your way back through Dorchester, you get out to, contender for the most impressive, if not technically largest, put a pin in it, but
We've actually done it. We've actually made it to Maiden Castle in time for, well,
I don't know.
it's not the most impressive sunset.
Maybe
If I can just get it in focus.
How's the sunset already?
No, we've got about 10 minutes before the sunset, but I already know that in this segment, I'm actually just going to be cutting in footage of a really great sunset I filmed here a little while ago.
Do that. Don't tell them.
Oh, well, too late.
yes, our hill-forting journey ends at Maiden Castle, and to give you a proper view, let's have a bit of a supercut. Maiden Castle is really without compare. The discussion on the largest hill fort in the UK gets into slightly silly territory, which we'll talk about next episode, but there aren't any other surviving places like Maiden Castle. One of the reasons it is the way it is, clear as day down below, is the result of the Roman occupation after 43 AD. The Romans, rather than trying to build within the ramparts of Maiden, made a point of instead settling in the valley, and you can see all the remains of Roman Dorchester on another day. We have more to say on this, a lot more, and it should probably wait for an episode where we can take some time over it, because at this point of the day we were losing the light, whilst also, like a lot of other places in the day, struggling to locate a trig point.
What do we think? I don't know. Don't know if this counts. I'm gonna tap it.
Giant hot lip man. Okay.
Blah.
So, well, that was a bit of a long day. This is not exactly a recommendation that you see Dorsets Hillforts like this. We had to be up at the crack of dawn, and even then only just fitted everything in. We could have bought ourselves a little more time if we'd done this right in the middle of summer, like starting at 5 a.m, but there it is. And I'm embarrassed to say that I was so distracted at Maiden Castle at the end of the day, I didn't even do a sign-off to camera. I only realised this when we'd already driven off and the light was completely gone. Yeah, this is why I don't do location shoots. I mean, respect to everyone who does, but it takes 4 times as long for some shaky footage with an obnoxiously high quantity of wind noise. Hence why I have always taken the coward's way out and pretty much assembled episodes around the voiceover booth. So, more loose ends than an abandoned carpet factory, we've introduced the topic of Hillforts, the Durotriges, and everything else, but not unpacked much of the history, the archaeology, or even just the epistemology of how we can even be sure of what we know about these places. So we're going to need another episode to pick up the pieces, and not least because I can already hear the clickety-clack of keyboards in the comments telling us all the Dorset Hillforts we missed in this particular speedrun. Yes, I do know about Flowers Barrow, thank you for asking. Most of all, and I'm sure you've picked up on this from the episodes, we've been at this hillforting malarkey a while now. In fact, if you're one of the veterans of Hillforts Wednesday from Twitter of old, massive shout outs, to all the heads who've made it what it is. All of you, we've learnt so much, and you've showed us so many places around the UK we never would have seen otherwise. And of course, the force of nature that is Miles Russell and the Durotriges project, not just for the archaeological work, but for everything they've done for the community too. And while Dorset really does have some of the most incredible examples in the country, we are only just getting started. And if I flash up Hillforts Atlas a second, this is the number we're looking at nationally. So you bet we've got more to cover. In fact, let's have a quick highlights supercut teaser. All of that is to come. I just don't know what people are going to make of all of this. For the newcomers, I hope I've been sufficiently non-boring, and for the OGs, I hope I haven't got on your nerves too much. Of course, this format can't hope to be the most comprehensive archaeological survey, yet for that, I can only once again massively big up and recommend this by Miles Russell and Dave Stewart. That's what we've been citing this whole time. It goes into more depth on each site based on the surveys done. And to pick up the ones we missed, I'm pretty happy with this scoreboard as far as getting around Durotrigian sites in a day. Yeah, so next episode we'll take our time going around more of Dorsets Hillforts, explaining the context we've not been able to do this time. Meanwhile, there's a lot more you can see on the channel. We're performing this extremely wide pivot round to history content. For a while we've been doing travel episodes, still kind of themed around all the ancient sites we can get to in a place. But as well as the prehistory of Cyprus and the Balearic Isles, we've also spent quite a lot of time on... It's pretty much the polar opposite of the Iron Age and all this. We're in the middle of a series that began with the history of Dubrovnik and the Republic of Ragusa, and then into the Venetian Republic and all the incredible things that they left behind in the Adriatic and into the Aegean. It's been this huge journey we've been on, so you might enjoy that as well. Meanwhile, to support what we do, we don't have a Patreon, but we do have a Bandcamp, and that's where you can find all the music you've been hearing in these episodes, and that's the place you can support us, either by buying our releases, or you can just stream them for free. That's also fine. But yes, you can also find a lot more of what we do on Blue Sky, so make sure to follow us there, and please subscribe so you can see all of the rest of what's coming up, and we'll catch you very soon.